Hello everyone, this is Robert, and this is the xTool P2 55-watt CO2 laser. Now that this has been officially released, I can do my normal review process. I'm going to be doing pretty much the same thing that I did with the GWick Cloud, which is over there. In this video, I'm going to be doing just kind of the product overview, the unboxing, and all of that. In the next video, I'll do kind of the product comparison, and then the third video will kind of go a little bit more in-depth into the features and the functions of it. But in this video, I just want to kind of walk you around it, show you what it looks like, show all the features of it, talk a little bit about the specifications and all that, and then, you know, maybe by the end of it, we'll get it cutting something just as a proof of concept to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So let's get started with the unboxing. So this is how the machine arrived to me. It did have some straps around the box as well, but yeah, generally this is what it looked like when it showed up. I was kind of surprised that this wasn't a pallet. It was just, you know, a cardboard box, and this did ship by standard, I think it was FedEx ground. So I don't know, you know, if that's a positive or negative for you. I kind of prefer stuff like this to be shipped freight in a pallet, in a, you know, specific box. But this did show up FedEx, and of course it was on the truck vertically, so just kind of something to keep in mind if you have issues with those types of things. The packaging was pretty good. It had foam all the way around it, so even though there was some tears in the top of the box, they didn't really make it through that far because it had this thick foam everywhere, and everything was relatively well packaged. On the inside of the machine, you had a lot of foam inside there, and the foam prevented the laser head and gantry from shifting or moving at all. So really well packaged here, no issues there. And inside the packaging was all the accessories. There's nothing else outside of what I'm showing here that is included. I know with the GWick initially it had like the air filter box, and it had I think 2 or 3 auxiliary boxes that came with it. This is everything that you're seeing. There's a lot less accessories that are included, but let's take a look at the accessories that are included. So here are all the accessories that are included with the machine. You've got your exhaust hose. This is about 2 meters or about 6 feet and is a 3-inch exhaust hose, so it's significantly smaller than I'm used to seeing on a machine like this. You've got a USB cable. This is USB A to C. You've got the instruction booklets, a very small bit of tools. You kind of have this little handle and a little Allen wrench, and I have no idea what these things are, these little spring clips. I don't know what those are. They're nowhere in the manual. So you got that. Then you have this little spring clip for holding the exhaust in place. Unfortunately, there's only one of these, so if you want to connect the other end to something else, you're just going to have to figure out your own solution. A little funnel for adding coolant, and then you do have a little stack of material. It's nice that they include this, but it's significantly less than what the GWick has. You've got 1, 2, 3, 5 pieces of cardboard. Let's see. Looks like 4 pieces of basswood, and then 2 pieces of very thin acrylic. This is all very thin, like 2 and 3 millimeter, and it's all pretty small too, which is interesting because this is actually a relatively large work area, and they give you really small pieces. So I thought that was interesting, but this is everything that's included other than the power cord. It's plugged into the machine right now, but this is everything that's included with the xTool P2. So here is a closer look at the machine with all the plastic and packaging away from it. And I will say it is a very attractive and nice looking and well put together machine. It's more plastic than you would think, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. So all this is actually plastic as well as the top here. But when we get to looking at the inside, there's a significant amount of metal on the inside, and it seems like there's a pretty substantial metal frame on the inside of this. So I'm not really too concerned with a lot of these exterior pieces being plastic. It feels nice enough, it feels rigid enough, and you know, that's totally fine. So let's kind of take a look around the machine. On this end of the machine, this is the right-hand side of the machine, we have what appears to be the laser power supply down here, vented, and then we also have the e-stop switch. Right back in here is where the power inlet is. So yeah, there's not a whole lot on this side. So here we've got a little bit of a view of the backside and the other end over here. And you can see there's a USB-C and an Ethernet. That's the only thing on the whole left-hand side. We've got the 3-inch exhaust. We have a lot of good venting here. We have this little tube, or quick disconnect, that says tube on the top of it. We've got fire safety set. I don't know what either of these are. We will see. And then we have the on-off switch and the power inlet. So there's not a lot of connections on this machine, which, I don't know, I make no comment about. I'm just kind of pointing it out. But there's really not a whole lot going on in terms of connections. That's it. That's all you see for the connection side. Let's, since we're back here, let's take off this top and we can get a look at the laser tube. Opening up the back panel is pretty straightforward. You've got a few screws on the back, and then you have a few screws on the inside right underneath the lid. You really only need to do this to refill the coolant or to service the laser, but yeah, just kind of cool to see nonetheless. So here's a look inside the laser compartment. You would access this compartment if you're going to service the machine in any way, add coolant, things like that. But unlike some of the other machines where the laser is actually on the gantry, this actually has the laser fixed in back, which is more typical of the larger industrial lasers. We have a reservoir over here for the coolant. I think this is a flow sensor, so this connects right on the output of the laser tube for the coolant, and so that is some sort of indicator of flow, so that if you don't have any liquid in there, something will happen. And then you might not be able to see it, but right there is the first series of mirrors. So the laser bounces off, goes inside, then bounces, and then down. So really nice. Couple things to note here is really nice metal machined clamps for the laser tube. You've got 2 along here, which allow a lot of alignment and offer a little bit of cushion for the laser itself. So that's how it's being held in place. The tubing is really decent. And yeah, overall, this actually looks quite nice. And this is what I was talking about before, is all these pieces here, this is all solid metal. So this rail up here, this piece down here is a piece in the back that you can't see. This whole inside frame structure is all metal. So even though, you know, it's relatively thin plastic on the outside, the frame structure is metal. And now that I've moved this thing around on my workbench like 5 or 6 times, it's a very rigid, very solid feeling machine. I mean, this thing's 120 pounds, so, you know, it's got plastic on the outside, metal on the inside, there you go. And so here is the other end. You've got this nice cap on the end of it, which is actually a nice safety feature. This is the cable that is actually supplying the high voltage into the end of the tube. And so you have this nice protective cap on the end of it. And right in there, I don't know if you can barely see, but right back here is the power supply for the laser tube itself. So yeah, pretty cool. So here's a better look at the inside of the machine. I'm going to be using a little black pointing stick to point at things because I had to boost the video so much to see inside this black on black on black, which actually is turning out to be a little bit of a negative. It's really hard to see inside here, even with the lights on, because it's so dark. But anyway, here we got the laser head. I'm going to go into a little bit more in depth on that laser. We've got the gantry, and everything just looks really nice fit and finish. Up here is actually one of the 2 cameras. It has 2 16 megapixel cameras, one right here, and then another one right down here. So it's kind of interesting the way it works. Is this one is for kind of high resolution close-up, and then this is going to be your typical kind of wide angle fisheye lens. So pretty interesting stuff. But the rest of this is pretty standard. You have a couple ports in the back. We've got one over here, you can just barely see it, and the one down there, most likely for the pass-through, which is kind of an addition that goes on the bottom of the machine for automated pass-through, and the other one is most likely for the 4th axis. So yeah, pretty standard stuff. So here's a closer look at the laser head. We have a nice cable chain on the back of it, which surprisingly is not all that common. And if we lift off this top, You can see that there is a lot going on. We've got a stepper motor up here. Over here, this is the camera driver board, and it looks like there's a USB cable actually kind of epoxied or glued in place. So we've got the 16 megapixel close-up camera there. And then if we pull off that, you can see some other stuff. This whole thing is the Z-axis for the autofocus. We've actually got the nozzle down here with the air inlet that kind of winds up through. It's actually kind of a nice little tucked in together design. And on the back here, we've got a whole host of headers and plugs. And yeah, everything looks to be filled up. There's quite a bit going on. And then we have the mirror right here where the laser comes in from the side, hits the mirror, and comes down through the head. So there's actually a lot of stuff in this little head, which is pretty impressive and very easy to access with just these little magnetic doors that just kind of sit on top of it. So pretty cool to see the autofocus, the air assist, the camera, and everything else that's going on inside this head. So there's a couple more things to point out. Here is the gantry, and right here you can see one of the mirrors. The laser actually comes in from the back, bounces off this mirror, then goes over there to the laser head. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because this is fully adjustable and is a really nice mirror block. And a lot of the lasers at this price point or in this kind of, smart laser category don't actually have anything like this. The GWIC doesn't really have a robust alignment system like this does. Granted, since the tube isn't on the gantry, you do require a little bit more alignment, but I digress. This is a really nice and very adjustable laser setup, so I'm pretty happy to see that mirror in here. The other thing to point out is this little guy right here. This is a solenoid that actually pops out to lock the door. So it comes into contact with the door, there's a little recess in the lid, and so when the laser is running, this actually extends out and locks the lid in place, which is a kind of nice little safety feature. On the other side, there is a little magnet switch or a reed switch that will detect if the door is open or the lid is open or not, but this actually is a lockout mechanism, which is kind of cool. So there is one mechanical issue that I did want to point out. The machine itself is built really well and is very robust, but on the gantry system, this gives you a little bit better look at the linear motion system. So on this gantry, you have this really nice solid aluminum rail, looks like just kind of an extruded aluminum rail, but the motion system is just these little rollers. These are kind of like the metal rollers that you saw on early budget 3D printers. And then you have a, what I assume to be a hardened steel rail on the bottom, and then one up top. And that is where the head rides along it. So there's a belt obviously here, and then those little roller wheels on, presumably the top and bottom. I can't really see all of it. And that is on the x-axis as well as the y-axis. On the sides, there's that same exact setup. Everything is very robust, very heavy duty, but this isn't the most ideal setup for a laser at this cost. I would have liked to see a pillow block bearing setup with actual linear rails versus this. The only reason I can think that this is on the machine is cost savings. There's really no other reason to go with this method over a traditional linear bearing setup. So I think this is one of the last physical features I want to talk about with the machine, and that is the bed. A lot of these come with just kind of a standard honeycomb bed. This one actually has this really nice slat bed. You can see all these little grooves in the back. These slats just simply pull out, and these are really nice anodized aluminum slats, and there's some number of them, you can count them, and they just kind of go along the bottom, and it makes it really nice, and it just, I don't know, it looks really decent. It's metal in the front, metal in the back, and these nice metal slats. It just, the build quality in here is a lot nicer than what you would expect maybe from the plastic on the outside. So really cool feature. And then this bottom tray actually pulls out. The white is just the packaging foam that I left in here because without it, you really can't see what's going on. So you can see that the machine goes down to my workbench underneath. and there's a little magnet right there, presumably for a reed switch. You could probably defeat this and use it without, although there is a warning sticker on the front. But my guess is, because this machine has that base that sits on the bottom of it, it's one of the kind of claim to fame features of this machine is you can set it on this base that has like a motorized pass-through, so you can run really long boards through it and it will actually motorize and move that beneath of it. So you take all these slats off, remove this tray, and then your workpiece would actually sit underneath this entire machine. And presumably this is where the fourth axis sits as well. So it's a pretty cool feature, and I actually like the relatively big opening here, and just the fact that these slats just kind of come out and you can rearrange them is pretty darn cool. So that's what it has for the inside on the bed. So I lied, there is one last feature that I wanted to talk about, and that is the little control panel up here. There's actually a display underneath here, and we have the little start-stop button. So if I hit the E-stop and turn it on, you can see it has this nice little animation for booting up. And obviously this top is very, very reflective, which makes it a little tricky to film in. But yeah, so just kind of going through its little boot up process, and this is multicolored, and this will give you kind of the error codes. It will turn different colors if there's any problems. And then you can see we have the temperature of the coolant, and then this indicates that the lid is actually unlocked. When it's running, this will be locked and the lid actually won't open up. That little kind of animation that you saw earlier, that will also show you the progress of how far along the engraving or cutting or job is that you're running. So that's kind of nice. And it is actually quite visible. My shop is very, very bright. I've said that before. I have tons of light out here. So it's actually quite visible in normal lights. It doesn't really look as dim as it does on camera, but pretty cool. And then this is basically just your start and stop button. Okay, so let's talk about features. You've seen the thing, you've looked at it, it looks cool. Why is this more expensive than some of the other offerings on the market? Well, it has some pretty cool features. At the core, it is a 55-watt CO2 laser, which is nothing all that impressive. The GWick Cloud is a 50-watt. Something like a Glowforge, I think, is like a 40-45 watt. So, 55 watts isn't crazy. You can get a lot of 60 or 80 or even 100-watt lasers out there. But, for the desktop smart laser type thing, 55 is ever so slightly higher than some of the others. It does have built-in air assist. It does have the internal venting. It has the internal water cooler. So what's really nice is this is the only thing that will be on your desk. You can take the hose, vent it outside, and you're good to go. So it is a nice self-contained. A lot of the others are equally self-contained. But the thing that sets this one apart is it has a couple features that no one else really has in the market. One is it has the curved engraving, so it can actually map using the cameras and using the autofocus. It can actually track along a curved surface for engraving. This is pretty big. No one else has really done this before, and I know I've avoided cutting or engraving, lasering products before, pieces that are at an angle, at a slope, or have some kind of curve to them, because you're just not really going to get that. Like one of my robots, Crippling Depression, had all those facets cut in the outside, and I never really wanted to engrave it because they're all at different angles, and once you get at a different depth, it's going to be out of focus. So being able to actually track the focus along there is really cool. So that's one really nice feature. The other feature that this adds is the ability to look at what's on the build plate and actually copy and mirror a pattern across of it. So let's say you have dog tags. I don't know, you're engraving dog tags or something like that, and you just throw down a bunch of them on the bed and you say, engrave this pattern on all the dog tags. In theory, I need to play with this more. In theory, you can take that pattern and it will detect the shape of all those pieces that are on the bed, and it can engrave them separately. It can adjust that engraving that you have to all of those other pieces that are on the bed. This makes batch work actually pretty cool. We actually do this at work to where we kind of set up a jig. We laser cut a jig that has multiple pieces on it. We load that up and then do them all at once. That means with something like this, if you're doing batch work, if you're doing a lot of something that several of them can fit on the bed at once, you can actually just kind of copy and mirror that along and it will align everything automatically. that seems pretty cool if it works as advertised. I need to play with it more. The two 16 megapixel cameras can help with a lot of other things. Other machines can do this, but in theory you can visually see exactly where your engraving or cut is going to go on the physical workpiece. So I think they give the example of like a flask. You're engraving a leather flask or something like that, and you can actually adjust and map that engraving directly to the object that's on here. Previously, what I've always done is I've gone and cut out an outline of that piece, use that as the reference, then put the part on top of it, and then engrave so I know everything's lined up. But with something like this, you can use the camera for alignment. Now, the last and final thing that is really interesting about this, a lot of these machines have pass-through, and usually they have some kind of cutout down here, and you can just slide some thin material through it. But it's relatively limiting because you can still only engrave in that area. And a lot of people end up going with the diode lasers because you can just kind of drop it down on top of a table or some other big item. This actually has a riser that is a separate cost. I want to be clear about that. It is a separate cost that raises the machine up, and then that is an automatic feeder system. So you can actually like feed large planks into it, and it's motorized, so you can actually cut or engrave the entire length of whatever board is in there. And that's actually pretty compelling. I'm probably not ever going to use that. That's not really for me, but I think that is an interesting feature that you can go, at least in one dimension, way beyond the scale or the work envelope of this machine by having a feeder system that can feed material in and out. So that's pretty cool. I did get pricing on that. I think it's still kind of to be determined at this point, but I want to say that the riser base is somewhere between $450 and $500, and then the automatic feed of that is going to be like another $500. So roughly speaking, you're talking about another $1,000 to do that automatic feed, which is relatively expensive, but if you need it, and if it's, you know, like let's say you're running a business or something like that, if you need it, you need it, and it's one of the only, I think maybe the only laser on the market that actually has that feature. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. So let's talk a little bit about CO2 lasers in general. And I feel this is worth mentioning is that CO2 lasers have come a long way. They used to be these $10,000, $20,000 and up machines, and they're really only for industrial applications. And at least when I started getting into this, the driver was critical. Like I used an Epilogue, that was the first laser I ever used, and the driver only worked with like Corel Draw, and you basically hit print and then you printed to the laser and you didn't have that much adjustment over the settings. It's changed a lot with Lightburn and all of the other free software that I can't think of right now. They've made it a little bit easier, and they're coming along with 3D printing to be a lot more just kind of consumer friendly. And there's really not that much to these. There is a CO2 tube, and spoiler alert, xTool isn't making the tube. They're probably not even making the power supply. So they're buying a power supply, they're buying a tube, and then there's the controller. And I haven't ripped this apart to see, but most likely it's an off-the-shelf controller that they're maybe adding a little bit of features on top of, but you basically have the tube, the controller, and the power supply. That's it. Everything else from there is just about the mirrors and moving that laser beam along the work surface. And with 3D printers being as common as they are, it's relatively easy to take a couple stepper motors, build a gantry, add a belt, and make it move along. I am not trivializing anything that, you know, GWitCloud or xTool or any of these companies are doing. It's just, it's a bit of a solved problem. It's not like, oh, this one moves so much smoother. No, they're all going to move about the same. They're all going to have about the same movement resolution, which is more than good enough for whatever you're trying to do. It really comes down to the feature set, the build quality, and how much they've thought through all the little accessories. You've got the venting, you've got the cooling of the laser, you have the air assist, and it's really cool that all these machines now just have all this built in. If you watch some of my previous videos where I built the laser cart machine tool tray thing that I have for mine, I had to build in the water cooler, I had to build in the air assist, and they had all these extra components that you need to kind of buy and put with the machine. Now they're all kind of built in, so it's kind of nice. What I'm getting at in this whole thing is there's not that much variability anymore in CO2 lasers. It really comes down to the functionality in the software, and the fact that this one has the 2 cameras, it has everything integrated in. That's kind of nice. That's that extra little bit that makes it differentiate itself from the rest of the pack. We're going to see what the conclusion ends up being when I'm finished doing this review and the G-Wick Cloud. I'm keep looking at both of these. I think the G-Wick Cloud is kind of maybe more of a stripped down version of this. It's kind of a little bit more utilitarian, and this is a little bit more of the feature-rich, kind of more luxury, I guess. It has a lot more cool features, and the fit and finish in the build, it just kind of feels nicer to use. So I think that's kind of where they're going to land, and I think their prices are pretty respective of each other. This one definitely costs a lot more, but I'm kind of seeing why it costs more, and the G-Wick is just a little bit more industrial, a little bit more utility, and it's significantly cheaper. So I just kind of wanted to get that out there. There's not a lot of nuance in the difference of the laser tube at this level, and the laser power supply is going to be very similar. The controller is going to be very similar. It kind of comes down to the build quality and those additional features. So I guess the last thing I'm going to do in this video is actually showing it cutting something. It's really difficult to see into the shiny black surface, but yeah, hopefully you can kind of see what's going on. This is just a simple engraving on cardboard, so nothing too special, but should give you an idea of how loud it is and all that stuff. It's a little bit louder than normal, but hey, it's a machine, it's going to make some noise. So yeah, hopefully you got something out of this. I know in the future videos I'm going to be doing a lot more testing with the software and kind of testing the features. I still need to get that riser base and see how the automatic pass-through works. They're going to be sending me that. Very excited to be testing that out. But so far, my first impressions are the machine looks very nice, it looks very capable, and it looks like it will be a nice addition to most people's shops and workflows. So yeah. Hopefully, yeah, we'll see more out of this. I really hope the software does what it's supposed to be doing, because that will be a bit of a game changer in the industry. So, as always, thanks for watching, and check me out in the next video, and let me know if you have any questions.